Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Slow Art Friday. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum, and I'm joined by Kathy Seguin, touring docent, who will be leading today's conversation, as well as my colleague Paige Taylor, our Learning and Engagement Assistant. Each Friday at 12 p.m., docents lead virtual interactive conversations about a few artworks in our collection or special exhibitions. The goal is simple: slow down, discover the joy of looking at art, and talk about the experience with others. For today's program, Kathy will lead us in an interactive conversation about three artworks in our collection and our special exhibition across the Atlantic: American Impressionism through the French lens. We'll spend about 15 minutes or so with each one. Kathy will allow us time to look at each work on our own, slowly, before leading a conversation about the artworks with questions. As participants, we encourage you to engage in dialogue with Kathy, Paige, myself, and each other throughout the hour. A few notes before we get started. You probably noticed that your microphone and video were muted by default as you were getting logged on. We invite you to turn on your video anytime. It's always nice to have a conversation with faces instead of names on a screen. And in just a moment, I'll also make it so that you can unmute your microphone. Choose a quiet room and close the door. Please silence any alerts from nearby devices, as they can be distracting during the conversation. If you do turn on your video, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, or other strong source of light or movement. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log in using a smartphone, we recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet to see slides and meeting tools on a larger screen. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial, or first name and last name, so that we know who we're talking to during the conversation. During the program, in order to ask questions or make comments, we do welcome you to unmute your microphone when Kathy asks for questions or comments. You can also type any of your questions or comments into the chat box. A third way to participate is by raising your hand in the participant sidebar, and I will call on you and ask you to unmute your microphone. Sometimes this method can take a little while to get to everyone with raised hands, so again, we just encourage you to unmute your microphone and participate in the conversation. Please do leave your microphone off, though, when you're not actively asking a question or making a comment, as lots of noises all around us can filter into the discussion. Finally, we are recording. If you prefer not to be recorded, make sure that your video and audio remain muted, and you use the chat box in order to ask questions or make comments. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right, Kathy, what will we be talking about today?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to be talking about three artworks, and the theme is threads of history, cut, sewn, and pressed. And last week, the museum hosted a virtual conversation with the artist, Robert Longo, and he quoted a conversation between Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh. And he said that Gauguin told Van Gogh, "With all your talk of emotion, all I see when I look at your work is just that you paint too fast." Whereupon Van Gogh replied, "You look too fast." So we will not be guilty of looking too fast today. We're going to savor it and take nice, slow looks at three works of art. So thank you again. And Christy, let's get started with our first artwork. Let's take a few moments in silence and just absorb the artwork. Okay, so what's going on in this artwork? Please just jump in as you care to.
It looks to me like an ironing board and a whole bunch of irons all around, but I find it interesting that the patterns are very different on the iron. Like if you start at the top left to right, every single one of them going across are very different.
So you're noticing the ironing board and then irons with different patterns on each of the iron plates. Okay, good.
When I first looked at this, I immediately thought of a boat, a ship, but a small boat, like a sailboat, and then but that's from my experience, and the surrounding circles were whether it was going into the wind or not, or what it was doing. And then I thought, no, that's really the surrounding circles, maybe badges. And then I thought, no, maybe that's seating in an auditorium. So this one, I'm up for anything, I guess.
Wow, okay, that's a lot. That was interesting. So a boat and wind and lots of different interpretations of what's going on in the circle. Great. All right.
Similar to is it Ananil? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Ananil.
Ananil. Similar to Ananil, when I first saw this, I saw a boat, and it reminded me of the ship that slaves were brought over. And I think because I've seen that image so much recently, and I saw all the dots perhaps symboling one different slaves, individuals. But then similarly, as I looked at it further, I said, wait, that's not a boat. And then I recognized the irons, and then went back to associating this with an ironing board. But for me, it does bring back a lot of memories, because my great grandmother, and I'm sorry, you may not even be ready for conversation.
No, please go ahead.
My great grandmother had one of those steel irons, and I remember her in combination either putting it by the fireplace or putting it on top of her wood burning stove and bringing it back to iron. So there's something about the portrayal of the irons that just make me think back in history.
Wow. Okay. So the first impression was of a slave ship, and then you started associating it more closely with the iron and wove back to your great grandmother, and again mixing it with a lot of history and memories. Great. Anyone else?
I'll add that if no one else has a comment, I'll add that I wanted to ask if the image was upside down, because I, when I do iron, I sit my iron in the opposite direction. So that was kind of curious to me.
So when you suggest if it's upside down, what would make you think that? So the iron being upside down, you think it should be the other way?
Or not that it should be, but yeah, I was curious to that. And I think that may be one reason that I didn't initially associate it with an iron, because, for safety, irons are always facing upward, but maybe that's interesting. They aren't safe. And if it is tied to, in my memory, if it's tied to a slave ship, then that's certainly not a safe process.
So you're saying, Terry, that when you iron with like the pointy side up, right? And they're sort of built for you to hold it that way.
Right. And when I sit it down, right, when I sit my iron down safely, right, I sit it on that flat part, not on the point.
So you're associating that safety element as well, and tying that back in potentially to the slave ships. It was not a safe crossing. Sandy, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I live in Native American country in Montana, so I naturally jumped to, oh, those are Native American symbols and art. So I just thought it was wonderful to bring it to the slave trade.
Mhm. And what was it that you saw that resonated Native American to you?
Well, the center one on the top looked very Native American right away, a pattern. And so I could jump all over and go, yeah, I could buy that. Those were all Native American patterns. And I could see the center one as beadwork.
Okay, so there are markings that could have been Native American and beadwork. All right, and Marcia, I see your hand is up, and Jacqueline will get to you following Marcia.
Well, I'm just noticing that the lack of color, that it's black and white, and that it's two-dimensional. And when I think about sewing, I think of color and dimension. So I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but I find that kind of interesting, right? And I also see the ironing board as kind of like an arrow, like a sign pointing somewhere, like that way to the sewing room or something. I don't know. But yeah, I'm just struck with the lack of dimension and the lack of color other than black and white. And it looks like it's on wood and kind of, I don't know whether it's meant, the white is meant to be there or whether it's just old, but that's just kind of what I'm observing.
So you're associating it with sewing potentially and fabric, and you're noting the absence of color here.
Yeah,
and
color and dimension.
Textures and dimension.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. Jacqueline?
I'm amazed that I never saw the ironing board or the irons to begin with. And I associated it with Aboriginal work and with shields. The irons being shields and the background being bark.
So you're seeing shields in the irons and then bark in the background.
Yeah.
Okay. Sandy, there was someone else who wanted to say something. Oh, Karen, yes. You need to unmute, Karen. Can you unmute? There's a little button up on the top right that should, if you click on it.
Well,
there you go, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, here we go. Someone came up, yeah. When I first saw the picture, my first impression was that it was a burial scene, that the ironing board represented a coffin. And of course, these were all symbols of irons all around, but it was honoring a person who had been, and I would go with Native American, a person who had been a seamstress in the village, sewn clothing for everyone, and honoring her in this way with all these different beautiful ornamentations.
So it's an honor for someone and a coffin. What a beautiful sentiment. Christina, did you have something you wanted to add?
My initial reaction was similar, I forget, to Terry. The first time I glanced at this, I have seen many photos of slave ships. And from this angle, looking down, and the design represents the design represents the bodies of slaves. And then I thought with the black and white, it just reinforced that it had to have something to do with African American and perhaps slavery. I'm not sure about the designs around the edges, but when I look at this, that's what I see. And I don't see it as just a plain old ironing board because it has these little holes in it, unless it's upside down or something like that. But I see this as this is the way they configured slave ships when slaves were brought over from Africa.
Christina, have you ever
Okay.
taken the cover off of your ironing board to replace
Yeah,
it?
and it does. Yes, of course.
That's what it looks like
Well,
underneath.
And we have touched on a number of things. I mean, Threads of History is the title of this, and so certainly in this dialogue, we've had a lot of different connecting threads. Christy, let's go to the label. I'd like you to tell you about this artwork. The name of it is Stowage, and it is by a contemporary artist, Willie Cole. He produced this in 1997, and it's a woodcut on kozo she paper, she being the Japanese word for paper, and kozo being the mulberry fiber. And Willie Cole was born in New Jersey in 1955, and he says that at the age of 3, his mother found him in the kitchen drawing pictures from the Sunday comics. And from that day forward, his family called him their little artist. And he created Stowage by actually embedding an ironing board, a real ironing board, and the sole plates of 12 irons into plywood to make them flush. He applied ink and then printed from there. And he kept all of the design elements, the actual size. So this is a very, very large artwork. As you can see, it's almost 4 foot by 8 foot. So when you're standing in front of it, you can imagine it's an immersive experience. His use of irons is both artistic and symbolic, but he says that the iron chose him. He was in his youth walking down the street, and he saw an iron just lying there, an old iron. Took a picture of it, took that home, and he says that the iron started talking to him. And when it was pointed up, he could see faces, and he could see African masks. And if he pointed it down, he could see shields. And a number of you mentioned that so you could feel that in this. And so in Stowage, the irons symbolize distinctive markings of West African tribes. They're all different. And the perforated metal ironing board evoke the brutal conditions that millions of men, women, and children suffered on slave ships more than 400 years ago. If you do look at some of those historical images online, which I encourage you to do, it looks very similar to that, just as Terry and a few others have said. Those illustrations look like that. They packed people into every single cargo hold that there was, lying down, head and then a toe and then a head, because they couldn't, there wasn't enough, they packed them in that tightly. Men in one section, women and children in another. It was horrendous. And so Willie also wanted the wood grain to show in the background. I see someone saw marble. It's actually wood grain. It's the plywood grain coming through. And that for him was evocative of the Atlantic Ocean, of waves in the ocean, water. So he suggests, and I think this is so beautiful about this artwork and Willie Cole, that African spirituality still inhabits the domestic tools used by slaves and their descendants in America, and that the brutal crossing did not sever an essential kinship to the ancestral homeland. And in this way, He imbues his art with healing spiritual powers. So that domesticity that we can all relate to, the iron is a very approachable symbol, and he uses it in that way. So thank you, great dialogue. Let's go to our next artwork, Christy. Okay, again, let's take a few moments in silence and enjoy this artwork. Okay, so what's going on here?
I see squares within squares within squares, and it's kind of interesting, the repetitive nature of the stripes, both horizontal and vertical, and the dark colors. And I see the stripe across the middle and the one above it in the middle square almost look like a different sort of fabric. I don't sew or anything like that. Yeah, but I don't know what makes that texture exactly, right?
So you're seeing lots of square shapes, 90-degree angles and such, and you're noticing the different values and textures of the fabric pieces, basically, of the colors and such. Okay, what more? Yes, Christina?
Yes, I maybe am very influenced because I'm in the middle of reading our next book for the Art Museum book discussion group, and we are reading a book about
Christy's holding it up.
Yes, about Southern quilts, and about the importance of quilts in the Underground Railroad movement. And so I was wondering, this is obviously a quilt, and I wondered, I was just reading the chapter last night about the log cabin design of a quilt. I'm not a quilter myself, so this book has, I mean, it's fascinating, but at the same time, I'm not familiar with doing all these. But log cabin quilt pattern was these straight lines, and supposedly there was meaning in this if there was some yellow in the center, which indicated that there might be a safe haven to go to, and you could interpret the route, the safe route to escape slavery by following what had been woven into these quilts. Now that could be way off, but this is where my brain is today because I'm still reading this book. And I recommend it. It's fascinating if you're interested in quilts, and especially in how they played a role in the Underground Railroad movement.
Okay, well, thank you.
I agree completely. Well, it's not a true log cabin. I know a little bit about quilts, but it definitely, if you get the sensation of doors or pathway through doors to a sort of an infinity, but the use of the different fabrics would also mean something. But yes, I'm also reading the same book. I won't be able to take part in the discussion, but yeah, I had exactly the same reaction. Not sure what these fabrics are on the edges. It looks heavy. I don't know.
So what type of fabrics do we think this might be? Yes, Karen.
I have trouble unmuting.
Karen?
I can't really see.
Sorry,
There you
go
go.
ahead, Karen.
I'm having some audio issues. Okay.
Oh, okay. Here I am.
Okay.
It reminds me of the quilts that the women in Gee's Bend, Alabama made that have become very famous, were discovered by someone who was traveling the South really accidentally. You all know this, about 30 years ago. So I'm a quilter. I have quilted a lot. And my next trip definitely is going to be to Geese Bend. But they have used in the past all materials, discarded clothing, discarded blankets, to make quilts for their bedding. So it was very utilitarian. And so I could see in the beige and in the gray textures that those are recycled, reused materials. And the whole design reminds me of many of their quilts.
Okay,
I'll
thank
take
you.
a
So
picture and show you.
recycled. Yeah. Recycled fabric, and a possible link with the Geese Bend quilters.
Yeah.
Great. Sandy?
Yes, what I wanted to say is the character of this fabric piece. I just had to smile because it's not straight. The lines are not straight. And the curvature on the inferior part, it just made me happy that it either they weren't trying to make it straight, but it adds so much to the character. And because of this discussion, I will pick up the book, and this is just so enjoyable. Thank you.
Oh, wow. So, okay. So we have a happy Sandy because of the wavy lines. They're not straight.
Connie had her hand up, Kathy.
Connie. Connie, you need to unmute. There. Connie, are you there? Maybe she stepped away. Terry?
I was going to talk about the structure of the quilt. First of all, I see the colors to be very masculine, but and I think it's cotton. That would be my guess. But when I looked at the structure, I see the stacking, and then it's sitting on a foundation. Well, it's stacked, and then it's embraced, stacked with the horizontal strips, and then embraced with the vertical, and then sitting on a foundation. And I don't know what that means. That's just what I saw when I looked at it. And then again, embraced with these inconsistent vertical borders.
Okay, so again, the inconsistency and the beauty of the colors. And you mentioned the base at the bottom. So where would you have, if this were on your bed, what would be at the head and what would be at the foot?
I could see it as a pillow sham. I could envision this as being a pillow sham, and I would leave it just the way it is with the pattern at the bottom, horizontal, and then the square in the middle. But the fabric doesn't look soft to me. It could be cotton, but just looking at the textures and the colors, it doesn't appear to be a soft fabric to me.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Connie, is Connie here?
There she is.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I just got lost in a website looking here. I feel oppressed by this art. I like it. I like the colors. I like the way she did the fabric and used the fabrics and the sewing and everything. But I feel as if I were in jail.
In jail.
It seems oppressive to me.
Well, there may be a reason that a jail is a structure. And let's go to the label, Christy. And I'll tell you a little bit about this quilt and the artist. This is called Scrap Up. And it was created by Amelia Bennett in 1992. It is made of cotton polyester blend, and wool blend, pant legs. And Amelia Bennett was born in 1914, and she learned to quilt by watching her mother. She made this quilt when she was 78, so she made a lot of quilts before this one as well. And she passed away in 2002 when she was 88. But she made her first quilt, yeah, at the age of 11, and then there were other quilters around, children, and even contemporary quilters from Gee's Bend. So it is a Gee's Bend work style quilt. And there is another contemporary quilter who said she learned by sitting under that quilt frame. They would frame it up and it would be like a table and all the women would be around it quilting. And Essie Petway would say that she learned by sitting under that as a 3-year-old, and she'd watch that needle go up and down and up and down, and the women would never even prick their fingers, and it amazed her. And she vowed that she was going to make a lot of quilts to wrap her family in, you know, when she was able to. So this quilting is passed on from generation to generation, and it's both a very social and a spiritual experience. And the generations of Gee's Bend women have made dozens and dozens, in fact, hundreds of masterpiece quilts. And they've only recently, fairly recently, past few decades, been discovered and appreciated for the beautiful works of art that they are. Gee's Bend is in Alabama, and it is akin to an island because it's surrounded on 3 sides by the Alabama River. There are less than 300 people who live in Gee's Bend. So it's a very small community. They all know each other. And there are a lot of common names, Petway and Bennett, and there just are a lot of names that are in common there. It's got one road in from the east and an unreliable ferry on the west. Scrap Up is a housetop pattern, and that's the most popular pattern in Gee's Bend quilts. So perhaps, you know, the person who said felt like a jail felt those walls on a housetop, and it's generally built from the inside center medallion out until it's deemed that it's finished. When it's not on display, but if it ever does go on display and you have a chance to look at it, or you could probably online enlarge it enough from the museum website. One of the things that I adore about it is there's a little tiny sliver of this blue color on the bottom left, where that, oh, Christy, great. Yeah, you can see it there. So obviously that pant leg wasn't just quite long enough. So she put a little blue strip right in there, which I thought was beautiful. And they use soft, warm clothes, worn clothes that speak to the former lives, you know, when they were working and they covered up legs and were out on the field. There is a visual rhythm to the uneven lines and the imperfect stitching. And it just all makes a beautiful piece of artwork. You know, many of you are probably aware, but there's the quilt top, and then there's the batting, which can be a fine cotton, a combed cotton, or it can be an old quilt, or it can be an old blanket. And then the back is generally a solid piece of fabric. And you can sometimes tell the age of a quilt by the back, actually, by the width that the looms in their days, that the weaving machines could weave fabric. That's changed through the years. And so sometimes these very old quilts, they're a solid piece of fabric, but it needed to be stitched together. I'd like to take us to a little 2-minute segment of a beautiful 14.5-minute film, which you can find it on YouTube. It was featured in the New York Times, and it was a film titled While I Yet Live. and it's by Maris Curran, who is an extremely talented film producer and director. And just to set this up, since this is just a clip from it, what I hope this will do is give you a sense of the setting at Gee's Bend and the Gee's Bend quilters. And it will also give you a sense of the women's response to this fairly recent appreciation of their textile art, which is now in some cases hanging in museums. Christy?
I was always held back because of where I came from, who my mother was, who my father was. But I realized I am somebody. I can do anything that I put my mind to do it.
It make me feel great. Cause I never thought Wilson would be in no museum no way.
In my picture right there. But this the first year to start. That's my quit there. That's quit there. And this is Essie. Queer.
It just was a joy to see it. It just like something just burst open because I never thought that quilt would be in the art world. People would think that was beautiful. That something we done could be shown all over the world and people get joy out of it.
Oh, girl, I just loved it.
You can look at a quilt. It can give you a feeling of something. You know, it gives you love. You can see love. You can see peace. You can see joy in different quilts.
I just love to see my beautiful quilt hanging up there. And I don't know what happened to them, but.
Oh, please.
So that's the Alabama River. I just love that clip. And the movie is, as I said, it's only 14 and a half minutes, and I would encourage you to go watch it. It's a beautifully done production.
What is the
In
title?
addition to quilting, Amelia Bennett, our artist here, used to enjoy fishing in the Alabama River. And in an interview, in her words, she said she loved to see that cork go down. So it's just a beautiful place and a beautiful quilt. Christy, let's go to our next artwork.
So Sandy had asked if I could send the link, and this unfortunately is not the right link. If you go to YouTube and just sort of put in New York Times op docs, how a group of women, it pulls it up. And what I can do is I can get the correct link on here and send it maybe with the evaluation. Sorry about that. I realized earlier that I had the wrong link in there.
Yeah, another easy way to find it, if you are on YouTube, just Google Gee's Bend and While I Yet Live. That's the title of the film, and it should pop right up from the New York Times. Okay, so let's take a few moments here and look at this artwork. So what's going on here?
It's quite abstract, and I see a person because I see arms, and even though the image of the face is somewhat obscured or in shadow, and it looks like they're cutting or crafting something that I can't discern.
Okay, so you're seeing an abstraction, a lot of simple kind of shapes and angles, and that she's doing something. Good. Others? Barbara?
It looks like there's some fabric hanging in front of her, and I can't tell what she's doing, but either she's cutting the fabric or maybe she's washing it. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
I definitely see the form of a woman, and I agree her features are obscured, but it's definitely a woman from her clothing that she's wearing. You can tell that it's a woman.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a woman and she is doing something, cutting or sewing or something. Very good. And an interesting angle that you can't really see her very well. Okay. Sandy?
Well, I see that she's ironing, which is great with the first one. And it looks like she's ironing with a bottle.
Now, what makes you say that? That she's ironing?
I just think it's a heavy weighted bottle. Maybe that's what they did in France in those days. And I think that is what she has to iron hanging above her, like it's been there to dry, and now it's her new project. But yeah, it looks like the shape of a bottle.
It's a very heavy bottle and ironing. Okay, Terry?
Yeah, I also agree that she's ironing. But I think it's interesting, the composition. It seems that her work or her load is more important than she is by the clothes hanging over her, being somewhat in front of her, that we don't see her face, and her face almost seems to be more blurred than even her hands and arms are. So I definitely feel like they're communicating some sense of labor and obligation, and yet it seems a little contradicting for me, because I do see orange, which makes me happy, but ironing certainly doesn't make me happy. And so, yeah, I see that little orange and yellow, but maybe it's fading to the left a little bit, because on the right side of her garment seems to be more faded, and the orange and yellow seems to be, if I could interpretate, going out of the picture to the left a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Christina? I know I'm jumping ahead a little. I mean, I know this is a Degas Impressionist painting, and I know quite a bit about Degas. And one of the things, at first when I looked at this looks kind of unfinished, but now that I'm looking at it and somebody's working here, I wondered if these were gauzy pieces of costumes that she was working with, because Degas painted a lot of ballet dancers, and that was a lot of his artwork. And so I began to think, maybe this hanging down are pieces of gauze, and maybe she's actually sewing or putting together some kind of a costume. I don't necessarily see the ironing bit, but I thought maybe it was something for the theater behind the scenes that she would be doing. It's just
okay. Good. Well, so you're connecting it all up with Degas and his Impressionist period, where he not only focused on simple shapes and Impressionism, but on dancers and the theater and those types of scenes. Let's go to the label slide, Christy. So the title of this painting is The Laundress Ironing. So those who thought she was ironing are right, she's ironing. And it is by Edgar Degas. It's dated 1882 to 1886. It's an oil on canvas painting. And Degas was born in 1834 into a wealthy banking family in Paris, and his father recognized his son's artistic abilities very early and frequently took him to the Louvre museum. And in fact, Degas started by copying the Italian Renaissance paintings at the Louvre. Prior to Impressionism, and you'll know this if you've been in the Biltmore estate here right in Nashville, many artists were focusing on wealthy portraits, royalty, biblical subjects, academic and more formal landscapes, and very lofty subjects as opposed to everyday people. In 1865, Degas stopped painting those academic subjects to focus on modern life, and that became a very big part of his artwork. And so he captured fleeting moments, as was mentioned, such as ballet dancers, milliners. He has an entire laundress series, patrons in cafes and such. And in this painting, he uses compositional devices that can be evident in Eastern woodblock techniques as well. And his perspective is unique from the top down. You'll see that in some of the Eastern woodblocks, that perspective of the artist being above, which does make her anonymous, as some have noted, including the screen of drying clothes in front of her. The vibrant colors and the loose brush strokes provide an intensity, and you can almost feel the steam-like atmosphere there. And so this really does exemplify Degas' move away from his earlier detailed works to his later style, which was bolder and with more painterly strokes. It is on exhibit right now through April 19th at the museum in the American Impressionism, across the Atlantic, it's called. American Impressionism through the French lens. And it's a beautiful exhibit, and I would encourage, if you're in the area or if you want to travel here, that you come and see it, because seeing it in person is well worth it. The stowage cannot be seen right now. That's been circulating out of our regular collection gallery. That was there when we first opened up. And there's another Willie Cole artwork in the museum now. I'm waiting with bated breath for Amelia's quilt to go on display.
I think it's set for the next rotation, Kathy.
Oh, okay. We heard it here first. Let's go to the next concluding slide. I just wanted to pull this together and look again at the theme, which was threads of history, cut, sewn, and pressed. And there may not be, there may be some obvious threads here, but there may be some that are not all that obvious. The cut theme, yes, could be obviously, fabric pieces being cut. But in addition, if you look at Willie Cole's stowage, that is a woodcut. And if you look at Degas' The Laundress ironing, that has a lot of inspiration from woodcuts. And in fact, I read about Degas and I saw an interview at the Asheville Museum's website. It's still on there with Willie Cole. And they both mention Hokusai, who was a wonderful, many of you may know him, Hokusai, Hokusai. Beautiful woodcuts, and he was an extremely inspirational artist for many, and the Impressionists were looking at his work, and he inspired Willie Cole. His techniques for printing on woodblocks inspired Willie Cole too. I was surprised to hear Willie mention Hokusai, so that is a connection. In terms of sewing together, I just feel when you look at the Gee's Bend quilters passing their information on from generation to generation and their techniques, that this is not only sewing quilts together, but it sews their entire community together, socially and spiritually. And then finally with pressed, well, obviously the laundress is ironing, and both artists, and Willie Cole, of course, uses the iron. You could easily suggest demeaning servitude from an iron and from the laundress ironing. So it could go there. It could be, is that demeaning? And in this interview with Willie Cole, it was very interesting that he said his great-grandmother was a domestic, and he described how that work, he finds joy in the iron, and how that work gave her financial independence, support for her children, and allowed her to care for her family on her own without having to depend on a man. So, and he got to wear a lot of good clothes. It had Bobby's name in the back of it, but a lot of good clothes and a lot of good shoes, and he was very proud of that. He also believes that the iron icon, and we discussed it today, brings people together with its association with home. Everybody probably has an ironing story to tell. I ironed my dad's handkerchiefs as a child, his little hankies. And to this day, I find ironing meditative and immediately gratifying. It gets the wrinkles out. And that's what Willie Cole said, that ironing was born out of a necessity. It was a hot rock, you know, at first, and through the years, it evolved to what it is. So I'd like to end with a quote from our textile artist, Amelia Bennett, who was 51 years old in 1965 when Dr. Martin Luther King was traveling all around the area with his civil rights campaign in Selma and Montgomery and the surrounding areas. And I'd just like to read it because it's a beautiful quote, I think, and it sets the tone of both Gee's Bend and what was going on in 1965. She says, "I remember when Martin Luther King came to Camden." Now that's not too far from Gee's Bend, as is Selma and Montgomery in that area. "A lot of them went to see him, but I didn't. I didn't have no ride up there. But I hear the stories and it make me feel very good. The path he cut for us. It was, you know, like you walk into a room and ain't no light on. You turn on a light in the darkness. That's what Dr. King meant to us. He turned on the light for us." And I was very touched by that. And I really thank you all for being a part of this. And if you'd like to contribute, we have a few more minutes. Christy, I know you have a conclusion.
Just to say thank you to everyone, and to thank you, Kathy, for choosing these 3 artworks. I think at first glance, you wonder what they had in common. And I think that everyone teased out their similarities and their differences really nicely, and sort of brought it together at the end. As always, I learned so much by being with you on these Slow Art Fridays, and I'm grateful for all of you and your participation. So thank you for coming today. Next Friday, our theme is different strokes for different folks. And we have 3 more of the photographs from our exhibition Vantage Points, Contemporary Photography from the Whitney Museum of American Art. You may remember that I want to say last month, the beginning of the month, we had a really great conversation about 3 photographs from that exhibition. So here's 3 more. You can preview them on our website. And I believe that the week after that is 3 more photographs from that exhibition. They are incredibly rich and have lots of stories to tell. And our docents just were all over those, wanting to use those for Slow Art Friday. So if you haven't already registered, get registered on our website. I think that Paige will include the link to next week in our evaluation that she'll send out. I also wanted to point out, I did put the updated link to the Giesben film in the chat box. Sandy, you had asked for it and I was able to find it. So if you scroll up to where it says New York Times Op Docs, how a group of women in this small Alabama town perfected the art of quilting, that is the correct YouTube link in the chat box. So sorry about that, that it was incorrect on the slide. I think
Christy,
Paige
if I
said
might
that she was
add,
going to pop it down to the bottom. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I just thought I'd add, since we have 2 more minutes and they're precious and I want to use every single one of them up. I thought I had too much stuff and I did, but I'm happy that we have a couple of seconds left, because Giesben quilters are now on Etsy as well, the contemporary ones. They just announced that in Hyperallergic.
Yeah, they are now, they have set up, I think as of February 1st, there is an Etsy shop, and several of the Giesben quilters are now on, so you can get your own piece of Giesben through Etsy, but I can tell you that it was sold out as soon as it went live.
Or you can get a mask. Some of
I
them
wanted a mask and they were just gone as soon as I went over there. So keep your eye out. The Giesben ladies throughout their history have always been incredibly resourceful, and they found a new way to get their work out into the world. So good on them. Thanks everybody for coming. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.